The Gemara says there are four Rishiyot Shabbat. There are four different types of domains when it comes to Shabbat. It says there's something called the Rishut HaYochid, a private domain, Rishut HaRabim, a public domain. Spoke about a Carmelite, a domain that's not private, not public. It's like an exempt area, but rabbinically you can't carry there. And then there's the Mokum B'Torah, an actual totally exempt area. The Gemara, and then when the Gemara spoke about Rishut HaRabim, so they literally give us, let's say, a fire hydrant, which would mean a item, a place that's not 10 tefachim high. It's less. The height of the fire hydrant is less than 10 tefachim, less than 35 to 40 inches. But it is higher than three, at least 3 tefachim high, because anything that's within 3 tefachim of the ground is like the ground itself. So therefore, it's 3 tefachim high, less than 10 tefachim high, between 3 and 10 tefachim. And someone is calling. Let's see if they're calling for staff. Let's see. Hello.
Hi.
Fa?
Yes.
You're on. You coming to join the class?
Yeah, I'll be there soon. Yeah.
Great. See you soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye. So the Gemara says that so that case, if you have an item that's three tefachim high, less than 10 tefachim high,
you put something down on
it, it's right. You would be
from it.
right, and you don't right exactly. You put something down on it, you take something from it, no problem. But that's because also there's one more condition for it to be even rabbinically permitted, is if it has the surface, it's less than 4 tefachim wide. So it doesn't have 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So it's less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, and the height is between 3 and 10. That would be a mokum patur. So now the Gemara, when the Gemara identified the Rishut HaRabim, the Gemara says, it talks about it says, Ezehu Rishut HaRabim. The Gemara says, what is a Rishut HaRabim? And the Gemara tells us about a Siratya and a Platya. The Gemara talks about a place that the Siratya is, let's say, a highway, so to speak, a road that connects city to city, that people travel. That's a public, it's called a public area. Platya Gedola is let's say, a big street that people gather together to sell their wares, to buy and sell. Those are some examples of public property, and then the Gemara says Zuhi Rishut HaRabim. After it says, you know what? Good morning, Ralph.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Ralph and Asaf. After it says, you know, what's a Rishut HaRabim? What's a public domain? And then it lists cases, and then after it lists the cases, this is a Rishut HaRabim. What is the emphasis of this? By saying this is a Rishut HaRabim, it excludes something else. So that's the Gemara's question. What is it coming to exclude? That's the Gemara's. The master said, we said in the Braita, Zuhi Rishut HaRabim, this is the Rishut HaRabim. We are on Vavam at base, 6b. The article is probably at 6b1. Zuhi Rishut HaRabim, so the Gemara says, L'm'ute idach de Rabbi Yehuda. It's coming to exclude the other statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Because the Gemara said before that when it said, when it had a similar situation yesterday, I asked the question, what is a Rishut HaYachid? What's called a private domain? And then it gave a case, if you dig a ditch, 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, that's called a Rishut HaYachid. That's called a private area. And also a fence. If you have a fence that's 10 tefachim high and if it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, those are two examples that Gemara gave of our private property, and also did the same thing. And after it says those cases, it says, this is private property. So we said, what is that coming to? What's the evidence? This? What is it coming to exclude? So it says it's excluded a certain law of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda held that 2 walls is enough to be considered private property on a Torah level. Most opinions hold these 3 walls to be a private property.
Well,
Right. So we find about 2 walls in a tefach regarding a sukkah. We have to see more about what's the law regarding Shabbat, if that would be on it. But regarding that might be unique to sukkah.
if you have a public road, and somebody digs a ditch in the public road.
In the
and converted it from public to
Right.
private.
Exactly. Just like if you go ahead and you build, you go ahead and you go ahead in the public property, you go ahead and you build a certain type of box, type of little building in public. You made a little booth. You know what I'm saying? That booth is now private. It has it has those walls. What's interesting, I was speaking to Rabbi Schwartz in the yeshiva yesterday. So, when you have, let's say, private property, you own a house. You have a house. And in front of your house, you have a lawn. This is your lawn. You own the lawn, your property. The deed says your property goes up to here. This is your lawn. But if there's no walls, you have no wall. Right. If you have no walls by your lawn, so that's not private property. On a Torah level, it's not private property. You see, you might have thought, what do you mean, Rabbi? I own the property. That's my property. But the actuality of the fact is that if you have no walls, so it's not a private property on a Torah level. And rabbinically, you would have a problem carrying in that, if a person wants to carry from your house into that area, there would be, it's not public, it's not private, because it's not private, it has no walls. It's not public, whether it belongs to me. And really it's not made anymore. It's not that I gave it over to the public that they could use my front of my house. If I gave over the front of my house to the public, then it becomes public property. So it's interesting to note that point, that in how it's being, in the actuality, how it's being used, and the makeup of the item. That I want to say the same way when it comes to your case, Nathan. I have public property, but now I have a private area in public property. I made something private, but I have this ditch, which is not public, and now that becomes. Morning, Saul. Thank you so much for calling. Thanks for coming. You have the Gemara if you want to go, whatever you want. You have different sizes, all available. And we're excited that Saul is back. You know what I mean? You heard that, Nathan? Isn't that beautiful? But Saul, we got to get other people to come too. Share with what do you say? We have to share the wealth. Okay. Share the share, right. I once told someone there was a man studying in the yeshiva. Good morning. I said to him, "You have so much Torah. I want you to give a class, share the wealth." Okay. So the Gemara says we're now on Vav base. We are on 6b, 6b1 on the right side of the page. Amama. So we just identified. The Gemara just said. We identified something called a Reshut Harabim. We identified what's called a public place. The road that everybody travels on is a public place. The street that everybody gathers, you buy and you sell. The market street, these are those places. These are some of the places, and the Gemara gives different examples of streets, public property, people travel. So these are public property. So the Gemara also said, it said, Zuhi, after it identifies the cases, this is public. By emphasizing this is public, is somebody say this and not something else. What are you coming to exclude? That's the Gemara's question. You got the question there, Saul? Amamad, Zuhi Rishut Rabim, Lemute Mai. What is it coming to exclude? So it says, Lemute Idach the Rabbi Yehuda. It's coming to exclude another ruling of Rabbi Yehuda, and this Braita is coming to say, you know what? This is the law, and not the other opinion. What was the other opinion? Did not. We learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Now turning the page. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Im hoita reshut harabim mafsakata. So Rashi says, what is the case going about? You know, when people would travel to Eretz Israel for Oli Regel to go, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, 3 times a year, all the men have to go, and all the men living in Israel have a mitzvah to go ahead and go from wherever part of Israel you live in to Jerusalem, right? The pilgrimage, right? And the Chag. What do you say, Saul? Okay, so we have it. It's called it's Ola Regel. That's what we call it, Ola Regel. So the Ola Regel, we got to be Ola Regel. We got to go to Yerushalayim. We got to bring korbanot, right? There's a certain thing you have to go to Yerushalayim, to Beit Hamikdash. Now you're traveling and you're on your way, right? Again, you're coming from Haifa. You're coming from wherever you're coming from. All right, so and now before you're getting close to Jerusalem, or maybe wherever you are, you're near Jerusalem, and now you camp for Shabbat. You can't travel. You're not traveling on Shabbat with the animals and everything. But what are the animals going to drink? Animals need to drink water. Well, let's say you have this, yeah, but if you have this well, and let's say you have a well, and many wells are 10 tefachim deep. There, you have your buckets, and you put your bucket down and you draw the water, but it's a certain amount of depth, right? The water is usually in a low area, and you have to draw the water up to feed your animals. Now, not necessarily before Shabbat you had enough time to draw all the water that you need for your animals. And so the water is in this ditch, which has a certain depth and a certain width, which many times met the dimensions of something called a private area, because it's like 35 to 40 inches deep, and it has a width of 15 inches by 15 inches. That's private property. If you're going to draw the water from the ditch to outside the ditch, above the ditch, you're going from private and you're public. You're where your animals located. Your animals are located. You know, you didn't have you didn't have a barn for every animal that have a barn that was overnight. So you're going to be bringing water. You can't bring water from private to public. So what do? So the rabbis said that if you go ahead and you put boards at each corner, you put 2 boards. Each board is 10 tefachim high, meets the height of a regular wall. Right. So you've gone from private to private. Right. You've brought water. But you're putting these partitions around the well. So therefore, the area above the well will be private, and you'll be able to take from that private to the private. You'll be able to take from that private. It's right. So it's one private. Right. It's one. Very good. It's one private. It's like one private area, because we spoke about last week. There's an issue. We did speak about last week. If we have 2 homes, if my home is adjacent to your home, on Shabbat, the rabbi said, I can't carry I have my house and I want to go into your house on Shabbat. Rabbinically, I can't do that. Because unless you make an Eruv, because I might come to carry from my house to public property, the rabbis were concerned. So if I make an Eruv, if I join together, then I could do that. But we're not going to get into that today, about that issue. I mean, unless we want to get into it. Morning, Emmanuel. So the story over here is that the rabbi said, we're going to allow you, even though you don't have proper walls, real walls over all 4 sides. If you look at the picture, there's a nice picture. If you turn to page 6b2, it's going to show Nathan's picture. See the picture, right? Here's you see 6b2. These partitions, they are let's say about 2 feet wide, and they're 2 feet wide, around 18 inches to 2 feet wide, 10 tefachim high, and it seems that this works at least on a Torah level to be considered a enclosed area, And the rabbis said you even rabbinically they because they wanted to make an allowance you to be able to feed the animals, they allowed you to carry from the well into this, provided that the space between this corner and this corner is not more than 10 amot. So 10 amot is around 18 to 20 to 24 feet. So no, 20, no, 50 to 20 feet. So it's a small area. You can but if the width is more than 10 amot, let's say amot is around 2 feet. Let's say if it's more than 20 feet, it would be a problem. It would not be considered a private area. But they allow not be considered.
Now, if you have multiple posts, say you want to enclose a very large area, and every one of them is less than 10 amot. Are you only allowed 3 or 4 corners, or do you have 20 corners?
Okay, we'd have to look into the Gemara and Eruvin for more details exactly how they could, how this was, regarding this, technical on this point. But that's what the Gemara says, that will become a private private area, and now you can carry from the well stall and bring up the water. You got to you have to feed your animals. We created this, we made this area private area. But what happens if the public would be walking straight through this area? This area, it's on a part of the area, it's in the public area, which is the normal walking of the public. Okay. Right. So now the public is walking through this area, but we said it's a private area. So when you have a private area, because we say it's considered private, but the public is walking through, does that, so to speak, ruin the walls? I mean, you have the walls, let's say these are considered halachic walls that will fulfill the requirements of walls, but the fact that the public is going through these walls, so to speak, would that knock out the wall? Would we look at it like the wall is not considered a wall? It lost the status of a wall, or do we say no? At the end of the day, it has the status of a wall, and the fact that people walk through it does not take away from the status of being considered private. That's the question in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, that's not. Rabbi Yehuda says, listen, if the people are walking, this is the regular path for the public people through this well area where I have these partitions on the corners, that knocks out the partitions. And you got to go ahead and redirect the public not to walk through this area. Don't pass. Go around, don't pass through this area. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda says, he says, if the pathway of the people would go through these, would interrupt these walls, it would go through this area. You got to tell the people, we got to reroute this route. Don't walk. Go around this area, because if not, then it would be considered public. The encampment, the enclosure. The Chacham say there's no requirement for you to go ahead and reroute the place. We don't say the fact that the public walks through this area, that goes ahead and knocks out the walls. And therefore, you could go ahead and just let people walk through. People want to walk through. You don't have to stop them, tell them to go around this enclosed area that we showed the picture of, because it's still considered private. So the Gemara says that when it says, Zuhi Rishut Rabim, this is the Rishut Rabim. A Rishut Rabim is the type of place that a highway that people travel, that's open, there's no walls around it. the streets that people gather to do business, that's a public property. But an area where the public goes through and it has these boards on all four corners, that is not public property. So therefore, by stating this is public, it's emphasizing this is considered public property, but the other thing that the other rabbi says is public is not public. Only this and not that. That's not public. The public walks through these four corners that we created, this enclosure. That's not called public. And that's what the Gemara says it's coming to exclude. Then the Gemara says, but you know what? V'amai kori lo gemura. But there's another, the Gemara says the language of the Braita, not only did the Braita say this is public, but it says zu hi reshut harabim gemura. This is a complete reshut harabim. What is the expression of gemura? You know, you could say this is reshut harabim. By saying this is a complete reshut harabim, it's coming to emphasize, you know, it's complete. You might have thought it's not a complete reshut harabim, or this is a complete reshut harabim. So the Gemara earlier had stated regarding reshut hayachid that the Braita earlier also used the same language when it referred to the private area. It says this is a reshut hayachid, it's a zu reshut hayachid gemura, a complete reshut hayachid. And the Gemara wanted to know what was that statement before, and the Gemara gave an explanation of what the word gemura in the Reisha, in the beginning of the Braita, why it emphasized the word gemura for the case of private property. So the Gemara is asking the same question. What's the emphasis of saying gemura? This is the complete. This is the not only this is the Rishut Harabim, but this is the complete Rishut Harabim. What is that gemura coming to add? The Gemara says, in contrast to what it said before, beforehand, the Gemara says, it said gemura by private property to exclude something else that you might have thought something else. But here the Gemara says there's no chidush, there's no novelty in saying the word gemura for this case in the Braita of the case of Reshut Harabim. But the Gemara, the Braita likes to be uniform. We like to put things in an order that looks the same, very similar flows, a good flow. So therefore the Gemara says, since the beginning of the Braita used that word Gemura, the Sefer also used the word Gemura, even though it didn't have any particular extra novel chidush that it's teaching us by using that extra word, just to keep things uniform. The Gemara says, I did the Tan, Amai Kar the Gemura, I did the Tan Reisha Gemura. Since the beginning of the Braita used the word Gemura complete, and there was for a special reason why he used the word complete. Tani Nami Sefer Gemura. For the Sefer also used Gemura. The Sefer used the word complete. We are now 6b2 on the top right side. So the Gemara said, you listed cases of Reshut Harabim, the Lechshav Nami Midbar. Why don't you list the case of Midbar, of the desert, as being a public property? The Jewish people in the desert. That was the case, the source, that was the case of the Torah, of carrying. What's the case of the Torah carrying? The Torah gave a prohibition of doing malacha on Shabbat. You're not allowed to do malacha on Shabbat. Not allowed to work on Shabbat. And the case of carrying, what's the case in anything that was done with the Mishkan, work that was done in the Mishkan, it cannot be done in, they would write on the boards, which number of boards to be able to, 48 boards. You gotta know which board goes next to which board. You would write a number, or you write something on it. So therefore, writing is one of the malachot. You can't go ahead and write on Shabbat. That's what they did in the building of the Mishkan. You had to write. You had to have the right outside. You had to write. The engineers, right? They had it. So they would carry the boards from, from, private property, from the wagons to the public, and so carrying the boards and the public. What was the public property in the Jews in the desert? Right? The Mishkan, where was the Mishkan built? Not in Egypt. It was built in the desert. The desert was the public property of the Jewish people. And we have a Braita that states when it identifies cases of public property, it mentions the cases that the previous Braita mentioned. It talks about the roads going from city to city, talks about the plazas, where the merchants gather, and also one of the things that it talks about, good morning, Emmanuel, it talks about the midbar. It lists the Braita lists the case of the midbar. It lists the case of the desert as one of the cases of a public area. Now, Nathan and I think we know from the previous Gemaras that we might have learned, right, Nathan? We spoke about the midbar. The desert is not. It's a desert a place that today is a desert a place that people commonly walk? Is it the normal place that people travel? It's not the normal place that people travel. So if you're going to carry in a desert, there's no 600,000 people. In the desert of the Mishkan, there was 600,000. That's where the Jewish community was. The Torah counts 600,000 people from 20 and up. So that's called public. But today, the desert is not the public area like then, right? So therefore, the desert will not be considered public on a Torah level. On a rabbinic level, if you're going to carry in a desert, you're going to carry in a real public area, right? So that's what the Gemara, I just played out the Gemara. So the Gemara, one Braita says a desert is classified as public, and why doesn't, so Gemara's question was, why doesn't our Braita identify the desert as one of the cases of public property? I just built the question, I strengthened the question by saying, and that is the case of the Torah. The case of the Torah, public property, was the desert. So the Gemara answers, Amabaye lo kasha, no question. Kam b'zman sheyisrael sheruya b'midbar, kam b'zman hazeh. There's two different time periods. When the Jews, like we said, were in the desert, when the Jewish people lived in the desert turned into be that's a public place. And Tosfos points out, because it implies, why is that public in the desert more than today? Because there were 600,000 people there. So Tosfos says this lends itself to the opinion that says, which is really Rashi's opinion, that if you don't have a place that 600,000 people live and have access to, that's not a public area on a Torah level. Therefore, if you have these small town USA would not be public property on a Torah level, because you don't have 600,000 people in that area. And therefore, on a Torah level, you'd be able to carry from your house to the street in those small town USA. But rabbinically, you can't, because it resembles a real public property. And if you carry from your house, let's say, Woodburn, New York, or South Fallsburg, New York, these little towns all over in the Catskills, right? If you're going to carry from your house to the street, to the main street, this is the main street in the town, there's 2,000 people living in the town, you know what I mean? And I'm just making a little, giving it whatever. If you're going to carry from your house to that street, you're going to carry your house into a real public property, right? So therefore, the rabbi says you have to make an eruv to show that this is different. This area is different. This is because I'm allowed to carry him, because this is not the type of, I have this, you see the poles, you see things that make you recognize this area is different than other public property. And therefore you'll be able to carry in such a property if you make the eruv. But if you haven't now, that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that's the difference. The difference is we're depending on the time period. Okay? they ask a very nice, interesting question. But the Breita, we have two Breitas. One Breita says, list the desert as a case of public property. One Breita doesn't list it. And the Gemara says the one that's listing as public property, because that's talking in the time period when we were in the desert. But we're not in the desert anymore. So why is the rabbi of the Gemara, the Breita, that which is post, that Breita was taught post the Beit HaMikdash, why is he identifying a case which is not applicable? Which is, meaning even the time of the Mishnah, it's already, the desert is gone. The Jewish people, even at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, even if the Beit HaMikdash was around, right? Let's say from the early Tanaim, right? Rabbi Akiva was around during the Beit HaMikdash area, right? But there's no desert anymore. There's no desert of that we have 600. You know any desert? You have 600,000 people hanging out. Okay, but okay, so very good. So let's hear what the. So they say like this. They want to say that there's a very big lesson that we could learn from the case of the desert to us today. And what is the lesson? Nathan is suggesting one answer. We'll share with you what the answer that they want to say. When the Jews were in the desert, the whole desert was considered public property, even though the Jewish people were not using that space, every space at once, right? You were using this area of the desert, they're using that area of the desert. Meaning the Jewish people camped every time in one place in the desert, right? You have, let's say, we make a stop in this desert. Here we are. We're all camped in the desert, in this area of the desert. The Jewish people had 42 travelings in the desert, right? We were there for about 40 years, 42 travels. So we camped here, we travel in this part of the desert. Now, when we're camped in this part of the desert, if we would travel from this part of it, we're all living here. We're not living a miles, 2 miles from here. But if we would carry from here to over there, the whole desert is considered public property because we have access to because we, the 600,000 people, are within reach and have access to those areas. Therefore, they want to say, so since the 600,000 people had the ability, this is the Ritva's answer, had the ability to camp in any place in the desert, therefore the whole desert is considered public property. And this would apply to us today as well. If, let's say, you have a public area, a public space, right? Morning. But this public space is available for the public, it's open for the public, but the public is not actually using this. We're all staying around this area. We're all for Shabbat, for this week, we're staying here. We're not going there. But the fact that it's open for all of us and we have access to go ahead, you hear that, Emmanuel? That makes that area a status of public property. So it comes out now. Let's say you have a street. You don't need to have, according to this, you don't need to have 600,000 people using every street in order for it to be a public property. The fact that 600,000 have the ability to use that street, we could all use that. It's open for all of us. We're not using it, Rabbi. We're not using it this Shabbat. People are not traveling this Shabbat. It's freezing outside. We're not going to have too many people, right? Whatever it was. We're all going to go to shul, right? But whatever it is let's say it's a situation that people are not using the street. I want to tell you, years ago, there was an amazing snowstorm in New York. Talking about most probably 30 years ago, 35 years, big storm, about 30 years ago. Maybe some people might remember such a storm. It was unbelievable how the shul, it was the Lower East Side, the Bialystok shul. People didn't go to work. People didn't go to work that day, but they came to shul. was a weekday. I remember it was a weekday. It was unbelievable. And I'll just end with my father of blessed memory. When the weather wasn't well, what weather wasn't well? When the weather wasn't good, my mom said to my dad, maybe you should stay home from daven at home. It was Shabbat, daven at home. The weather was bad. Some people, like someone said to me, Rabbi, I mean, if it's very cold, I'm not sure if I want to come to shul, depending on the weather. Now, you're a 95-year-old man. If you're a 95-year-old man, I can understand. You can't come to shul because of the weather. I'll give you a doctor's note, rabbi's note. My mother said to my father, maybe stay home and pray in the house. My father said, would I go to my office? He didn't have office business. I had a little mom and pop shop. Would I go to my shop? If this was the weather, I would go to my shop. If I go to my shop, I should go to shul. What do you say to that? Yes.
Like you're in a campground or you have a temporary house, like in the desert, is that considered public, private to public?
So if you would be, let's say, in the desert, like today's desert, or the other case was you had a house where
Let's say you went camping with your friends and you put up a tent.
right. So that tent will be private. So rabbinically, that area outside the tent is open for anybody to come. It's not according to Rashi, it's not public on a Torah level. It's not a place that people are, it's not a place, that area, it's not a place that people generally will go. It's not like 600,000 people have access to that place really, because no one's really, it's not like you have 600,000 people right next door. So that would not be a Torah public place, but rabbinically, you can't carry from that tent outside. Even the tent is temporary. You will not be able to carry. You have a rabbinic issue. Thank you.
So just to recap, only if there's 600,000 people, is it considered on a Torah level for there to be this distinction between public and private, but the Rabbanim also instituted in areas like the desert, so that even though it's technically a no man's land in a way.
But since it's open for it's public, people might make a mistake and wanting to say, you know what, I could carry there, I'll carry it. If you could do it there, you could do it anywhere, right? You might come to make that mistake. Just like you can understand, small town USA, I'll carry from my house to the street, which is only 2,000 people that are in this area. There's no 600,000 people. But if I come to that, I'm going to carry into a real street.
600,000 men above 20.
Right.
It was 2 million.
Right. Exactly. But the total, but the counting of the 600 was the Torah counts 600,000 people. So that's how we're going with the count of the Torah, because those people that were over 20 in the count.
Not 13.
What'd you say? It was right. The Torah counted around 600,000 men over the age of 20. 20. No, but we're saying. No, yeah, but we don't require 600,000 over 20. You have to have 600,000 people. Could include the women. Right, and that's part of the amazing miracle that the Jewish people lived in the desert, which is impossible. Those areas for babies and children and old people to live in such a desert, and yet God took care of them. That's what we celebrate Sukkot. What's the celebration of Sukkot? It's the clouds that protect the heat of the day, the coldness of the night. There was a miraculous existence in the desert. That's why we celebrate Sukkot. To remember what? Yeah, I don't think so, Sal. But they needed much more than that. Have a great day. Shabbat, oh, beautiful Shabbat. Ralph, have a great Shabbat. Thank you for coming. Emmanuel, you add a lot. Take care, Ralph. Thank you. You're doing. Take care. Bye-bye, Ralph. All the best.